All right, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming back after the break. On behalf of the Cornell University team, welcome to our solar and battery storage solution for the UCF district use case.
Hannah, you're a little more quiet than you were earlier.
Your audio seems muted.
Can you hear me?
That's better.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Cornell University, welcome to our solar and battery storage solution for the UCF district use case. Our team consists of 4 sub-teams, each targeting a main deliverable area: design, development, distribution, and finance. We had to constantly communicate between sub-teams to make sure that our solution was not only feasible in all of these aspects, but that it was the absolute best one to pursue. UCF's master plan and the district profile led us to prioritize conservation and energy efficiency by considering the financial feasibility, energetic input, and sustainability of each decision in the design process. Accounting for these priorities, the hands-down most ideal system has a 6.3 megawatt DC nameplate, which produces over 9 gigawatt hours of electricity annually. In accordance with UCF's carbon neutrality goals, this system prevents over 8 million pounds of carbon dioxide from entering the atmosphere and is equivalent to planting over 100,000 trees, among other environmental comparisons shown here. A small but ideal battery bank was modeled, but is not recommended, hence the asterisks, as we'll explain later. All in all, this project has a $0 NPV.
One of the main land use factors and constraints that we had to consider from the very beginning of the design process was that the parcel of land that UCF requested we build on is home to 6 endangered species that are listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. 5 of the species are trees and brush, while the 6th is the gopher tortoise that burrows on the bottom of the parcel. The location of these species, especially the trees and brush, meant that we had to be very careful when deciding where to put the panels, because under the Endangered Species Act, you cannot kill, harm, or essentially touch a listed species. There is no scenario in which we could reasonably recommend a design in which the land was cleared, even with the incidental take permits that I will be discussing in the development section.
Despite endangered species being apparently everywhere on the ground mount parcel, we found a loophole. There is an access road which appears to have a pre-cleared 70-foot vegetation setback on either side. This setback can be developed within code to have a 1.8 megawatt nameplate and produce 2.8 gigawatt hours annually. It's worth mentioning here that we aim to keep our maximum hourly production under the campus minimum of around 7 megawatts, because selling anything back to the grid would result in about a 4-cent loss for UCF. The ground mount physical parameters were optimized based on simple geometry and industry recommendations, but the key part to note here is the recycled concrete ballast design. Not only do these ballasts make it for cheaper and faster installation, but they further UCF's sustainability goals while also engaging with and supporting local businesses. These ballasts can also be added modularly to address high wind loads. And speaking of wind load was the primary concern that led us to determine that floating solar was not feasible for UCF. In addition to elevated operations and maintenance costs and questions as to floating solar's effect on aquatic ecosystems, UCF is only 30 miles inland from the east coast of Florida and the Atlantic Ocean. Due to this close proximity, there's absolutely no way a floating solar system could survive hurricane force winds, which have been well documented to reach nearly 100 miles inland. For reference, these are real photos of the Category 3 Hurricane Dorian over the UCF campus in 2019. Looking at these, it's undeniable that wind load and hurricane-related risks cannot be ignored, and that they will only become more important to consider as climate change causes more frequent and stronger hurricanes. Knowing this, carports are very wind resistant. UCF is perfectly suited for carports as it has a large area of previously underutilized parking lot space. This area is ideal for a 4.5 megawatt system of single and double car row installments, as well as a solar canopy on top of the lone parking garage in the district. On the left here, you can see what is meant by a solar canopy. They are the cutting edge of solar design, with one of the first ever being implemented at the University of Hawaii not even 2 years ago. They are hurricane resistant as their foundation can be incorporated into the existing structure. On the right are examples of single and double row carports. They will provide a welcome shelter from the Florida sun and can also be built to well withstand hurricane force winds by inserting their rebar and steel concrete support beams deep into the ground to ensure stability. Many of the rooftops were also viable for small scale solar installations, but our main question was, were these small scale installations really worth the upfront labor costs in the long run? With all these systems in mind, we made a matrix to quantitatively determine what combination of rooftop, carport, and ground mount systems was best. We considered 3 main designs: carports only, carports in the realistic ground mount that consider the endangered species, and finally, the carports and a theoretically maxed out ground mount system which disregarded endangered species concerns. Even though this last design is not legal or realistic, we included it to model the potential of a plot of land that size, just in case UCF was interested in developing a similar area in a different, more viable location. Each of these 3 main options also included another subsequent option, which included rooftop solar, bringing the total design avenues to 6. For the actual matrix, we considered, in weighted order, compliance to the Endangered Species Act as a yes, no, go, no go, then cost, then output, and then community engagement obstacles. The matrix determined that option 2.1, the carport and realistic ground mount with no rooftop solar, was the most ideal system. This system never exceeds the daytime minimum load and at its best is capable of covering over 75% of the campus load. Equipment-wise, we proposed top-of-the-line models. The 330-watt panels we propose are made with cutting-edge heterojunction technology, which limits temperature and performance losses. The proposed inverter, transformer, and switchgear are turnkey and come already configured for use on a skid as seen on the right. Tesla's Powerwall 2s were chosen as the ideal battery. However, what you need to understand is that due to the high capital costs for the batteries themselves, combined with the 3-cent set electric cell back price, any battery system at all would be lost for UCF. However, in the event that UCF wanted a battery system for resilience purposes, we estimated UCF's emergency systems load and modeled a system to last for the average power outage duration in Florida, around 2 hours. Even this, the most justifiable system, is not economically feasible. Therefore, we don't formally recommend investing in battery storage for the moment. But if UCF was inclined to invest in carbon neutral resilient solutions, this design would be the most practical.
To give a bit of background on what distribution system impact analysis is, there are 3 central responsibilities. The first is to use the software OpenDSS to model each of the proposals and to simulate the performance of the distribution system with the added PV generation. Then we analyze the results from each simulation to identify issues such as voltage exceptions or excessive overloading. And finally, the results from the analyses are used to compare each proposal to the distribution system as it is now and determine the viability. In order for a proposal to be viable, it must satisfy the constraints that voltage irregularities remain within the required limit, overloading of grid components is kept to a minimum, and any power generated within the campus is used on campus. So now looking at our final proposal, the voltage throughout the distribution system is in fact kept within the limit of plus or minus 5% nominal, and the voltage exception report, which contains details about every simulation interval, recorded no instances of exceptions. For the constraint regarding overloading, the simulation showed no net increase in overloads of distribution system components after adding our proposal. And lastly, the constraint regarding power exports is satisfied because, as Hannah mentioned previously, the proposal is sized such that the maximum PV generation remains under the campus minimum load.
The project workflow and permitting is done through the university and fairly standard. A program manager for the project will be identified, and they will bring the project through this 5-step process: planning, the selection of the design and construction firms, which for a project this large is regulated by the state of Florida, the design, construction and permitting, and finally closeout. Under the Florida Building Code, the university is exempt from all local zoning permits, fees, and the construction code itself, but the university actually mandates the state construction codes regardless. So that's what the project would need to meet. Fire and electrical codes come from the Florida Fire Prevention Code and NFPA 70. The two biggest barriers to development both deal with the ground mount solar. The first is the Endangered Species Act. By keeping the development to the access road, we expect to be eligible for an incidental take permit, which I will explain in more depth on the next slide. The process to get this permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service can take a significant amount of time. Similarly, the road will no longer be fit for vehicles, so it will need to be closed off and rerouted. The second barrier is that under this design, the solar panels will be placed about 100 yards away from a subdivision. This will require UCF to make extra efforts to work with those that are living in such close proximity if they're uncomfortable with the project. This will also necessitate the project to have fences to keep out anyone, especially children, that could wander into the area. Under Section 10 of the Endangered Species Act, UCF can apply for an incidental take permit, ITP, to take otherwise legal actions in the habitat of an endangered species. The permit will protect UCF if the construction of the project or the panels themselves inadvertently cause harm to an endangered species. Applying for an ITP is a 4-step process. Altogether, this will take at least 2 years. If UCF already has an ITP, then they can bypass the Habitat Conservation Plan and the environmental assessment or environmental impact statement, and then just submit an amendment to their pre-existing ITP. This would shorten the time period significantly. Finally, this project has many opportunities for community and campus engagement. Overall, it aligns nicely with the campus master plan because the project can function as one of the building blocks of a campus microgrid and is generally attentive to efforts aimed at protecting endangered species. Engagement opportunities include allowing students and campus organizations to learn more about and work on the project itself. Similarly, collaboration with the Florida Solar Energy Center, a UCF organization that per Florida law is the main researcher and regulator for solar in the state, should be considered. The university will also need to run public meetings with the surrounding community, especially the subdivision next door to the ground mount system, and create a clear schedule for when parking lots will be closed for construction and which alternative options will be available for staff and visitors.
In our financial analysis, the weighted average cost is a function of the combined portfolio of commercial carport and utility scaled fixed builds. Our calculations are based on the total system size of 6,200 kilowatts. Total cost per watt is $1.33, which is the sum of construction cost and developer margin. This leads to the total project cost of approximately $9 million with an IRR of 6.7%. This total project cost is equity-based investment, both cash and taxes. Now in this next slide, I'll take a deeper look into our numbers. I want to mention we also explored a lease option and calculated an annual lease payment of approximately $700,000 for 30 years. In determining the cost structure, we made 2 assumptions. First assumption, the model uses the national panel cost of 47 cents per watt and the national inverter cost of 21 cents per watt. The second assumption is based on the assumed cost of power. PPAs are not legal in the district jurisdiction, so the cost is based on UCF's avoided cost, which is calculated at 7 cents per kilowatt using Duke Energy's assigned schedule. In terms of taxes, the federal rate is 21%, the state rate is 6%, and we receive a 26% tax credit. To summarize our presentation, the final system has a nameplate capacity of 6.3 megawatts DC and produces over 9 gigawatt hour annually. It can be completely and easily integrated into the existing grid, and it's mindful of environmental and community considerations. With that, we want to thank you for your time, and we'll take any questions you might have.